What's going on, Headliner Nation? Kyle back with the Fantasy Headliners. It's time to get ready for Week 7, and that includes my wide receiver start and sits for the week. And as always, we got to talk about our accuracy last week, so let's go ahead and pop it up on the screen right there. 65% on my wide receiver accuracy for last week. You know, the goal is always 70 at least each week, so a little bit under that, but the prior 2 weeks, well over 70%. A few names there that I missed on that, I wish I wouldn't have, but that comes with the name of the game, right? We're not going to get them all right. So we move forward into Week 7, and now we got to talk about our matchups this week, and of course, get back over that 70% mark, which I'm feeling pretty good about this week. So let's go ahead and jump into it and talk about our first matchup on Thursday Night Football. The NFC East, it's a mess, right? I mean, the Dallas Cowboys lead the division at 2-4, and they don't look anywhere near being a championship or an even division-winning caliber team. Well, two teams in that division face off on Thursday Night Football this week with the Giants and the Eagles fighting it out. And for me, on the Giant side, the only wide receiver I'm going to have as a start is Darius Slayton. Philadelphia is giving up almost 40 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, and Darius Slayton has been the only guy that has, for the most part, been consistently good for the entire season. He's had a couple of up and down weeks, but so far this year, if you've put him in your lineup, you've gotten a pretty decent return. I like him to score a touchdown this week and to have possibly an even bigger game. So we're going to list him as a start. And then for the Eagles, we've got a lot of names this week because I have no idea who in the world is going to end up playing and not playing. Alshon Jeffrey and Deshaun Jackson are both guys that could be in this week, but they could both end up being out as well. It does seem more likely that Deshaun Jackson will play than Alshon Jeffrey, but we'll have to monitor it all week long. Heck, even Jalen Reagor is available to come off the IR if necessary. I don't know what to tell you about this. I've got everybody listed as a start except for Fulgham, and we're going to go with him as a start this week. Everyone's listed as a sit except for Fulgham, and I'm going to run with him this week as a start because my hope is that if one of these other guys play, Deshaun Jackson, Alshon Jeffrey, whoever it may be, they don't see James Bradberry. My hope is that Bradberry is going to be opposite of Fulgham and he's not going to have to worry about it. If that's the case, he could continue the hot streak that he's put up the last couple of weeks. I would expect that Philadelphia is going to have to throw the ball around a little bit in this matchup, and he would obviously be the main beneficiary if they do that. He's been on that same connection with Carson Wentz now for a couple of weeks, and if he doesn't get Bradberry, that could definitely continue this week. So my hope is he doesn't get Bradberry. Now, if he does for some reason, we're going to have some issues at that point, and it could be very likely that he doesn't end up as a start. So we'll continue to monitor the progress of everybody else on this team throughout the rest of the week, and make sure that you check in on my wide receiver standings later on in the week so I can update you with all the latest information then. Pittsburgh at Tennessee, and I would love to start Juju Smith-Schuster again. But in a smash matchup last week, going up against a slot corner that hasn't been able to stop anybody all year long, he didn't do anything. Heck, if it wasn't for his 2 touchdown performance to start the year, Juju would basically be a bust every single game so far this season. So for me this week, I am going to list him as a sit. However, when you look at the matchup, it's a pretty good matchup because Tennessee allows the 4th most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. So Chase Claypool will end up being a start for me once again, and Deontay Johnson will also be a start if he plays this week. Now, for some reason, if he's out again, make sure you tune into those wide receiver rankings. I can't stress that enough. I'll update you then. We'll talk a little bit more about it. But as of right now, I'm going to go ahead and list him as a start because the matchup on the outside for those wide receivers is too juicy this week. On the other side for Tennessee, I'm going to go ahead and start A.J. Brown and Adam Humphries. Going back to slot wide receivers, okay, last week, Pittsburgh, I talked about it going up against Cleveland. Hilton's not the best slot corner in the league. When he has to line up in the slot against opposing wide receivers, he has trouble with it. didn't end up working out that way. And I'm going to contribute that more to Baker Mayfield being hurt, because obviously nobody for Cleveland performed very well against Pittsburgh last week. So maybe more along the lines of, Baker Mayfield not being 100%. So when we take a look at this matchup and we take a look at Ryan Tannehill and the way he's been playing for the last couple of weeks, I'm going to go ahead and move Adam Humphries into the start position. Again, Hilton right now, Mike Hilton has allowed 14 receptions on 20 targets so far this season in the slot, but he also he averages 2.02 yards per snap, which is fifth most in the National Football League. So Mike Hilton in the slot doesn't do that good of a job at stopping wide receivers. And my hope is this week is that Tannehill will know that and will target Adam Humphries a little bit more in the slot. A.J. Brown is going to be a start for me. Pittsburgh and Tennessee, both of these teams give up quite a bit of fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, right around that 40 area. So this is a matchup that could really have a lot of points scored and a lot of back and forth. Definitely think we're going to see the over on this one. And if that happens, the wide receivers are going to play a big part in that. Dallas at Washington, and Amari Cooper, he looks healthy. Thank God. Now, I mentioned it last week in my wide receiver videos that he was going to be a sit for me. And a lot of you, I don't think you listened to why, okay? I'm not sitting Amari Cooper because I don't like him. He's right here. I wouldn't have his jersey hanging up in my studio if I wasn't an Amari Cooper fan. And if you've been around the fantasy headliners for quite some time, you know it's hashtag always Amari for me. But there was a concerning development in week 5, and that was when Amari Cooper's snap percentage dropped all the way down into the 60s. Why was that? Where did it come from? It wasn't because of the pace of the game, because Dallas was having to throw to stay in the game. Why was Amari Cooper all of a sudden off the field so much in week 5? Well, heading into week 6, I had concerns that foot issue that we've seen in the past was popping up once again, and I wanted to be cautious with it. Now, Amari Cooper ended up being a start. He ended up being a top 30 wide receiver, and nobody is happier than your boy, okay? I love it because Amari Cooper has been on fire this year. He was a must-have wide receiver for me before the season, and of course, I had him as my 8th overall wide receiver in half PPR formats. That was a lot higher than a majority of the people in the industry. In fact, I don't know too many people that had him higher than what I had him. Okay, so it's not hating on Amari Cooper. It was worried about that foot, and he proved to me last week he is healthy. His snaps from week 5 to week 6, he had 42 snaps in week 5, jumped all the way back up to 79 snaps last week, which led the team, and he was targeted often. He had that great catch in the end zone there, towards the end of the game for the touchdown, so give it to me. Okay, he's going to be a start for me again this week going up against Washington. CeeDee Lamb, who's also in top 10 of most receiving yards this year, he's going to be a start for me this week. Michael Gallup is going to be a sit. I just, I don't 100% get it. I knew that these wide receivers could be hit or miss every single week coming into the season, but I did not anticipate Michael Gallup not getting basically anything. And not only that, but he has the most snaps at wide receiver in the NFL right now, and he's not producing at all. So basically, he's just being used as a decoy, pulling people down the field, and CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper are eating underneath along with Ezekiel Elliott. So, heading over to Washington, Dallas is giving up the 6th most fantasy points per game this season to opposing wide receivers. Terry McLaurin is going to be back to a start for me again this week. He has the 9th most receiving yards in the league, and I think he's a guy that's really underrated right now. I don't think a lot of people are talking about him, and that's because, Dwayne Haskins wasn't playing at his best, and then there was the switch to Kyle Allen, and then Alex Smith came in, and then we're back to Kyle Allen, and obviously the team just hasn't played that well either, and I think that's cooled a lot of people on Terry McLaurin. But we're going to get back on track this week going up against Dallas. McLaurin in for a pretty big week. Wide receivers opposite of him, Wright and Inman will both be sits, but McLaurin could be in for a good week this week and get back to those mighty producing ways. For Buffalo and the Jets, we're basically starting everyone on Buffalo. Why? Because they're playing the Jets. Yep. Stephon Diggs, John Brown, Cole Beasley are all going to be starts for me. Davis will be a sit because Davis for me isn't really an option for your fantasy lineup unless a guy like John Brown ends up missing. And as of right now, because he played this past week, he should be in this week with no issues. So all 3 of those guys are going to be starts for me. The only concern is that the ceiling for Beasley is a little bit on the lower side because Beasley's really the guy as the game goes on. He's the guy that is found underneath and kind of works towards that volume a little bit. But when you're facing the Jets, you might end up running the ball quite a bit, especially if they were to hit some deep plays in the first half to Brown and Diggs. And then at that point, puts the game out of range and the passing starts to slow down a little bit. But the run game hasn't been that great for Buffalo this year either. Singletary has struggled at times. Zach Moss looks like garbage. Who knows? Maybe they just won't run the ball at all. They'll just throw it the entire way because Buffalo, they want to get back on the right track. For the Jets, I brought Breshad Perriman up in my waiver wire video. And for that, I told you then that this matchup was coming up. It was going to be difficult. If you picked him up, you weren't probably going to play him right away. And that holds true. Possibly going to be finding himself going up against White. Not a great matchup. So we're going to go ahead and sit him. But Jamison Crowder, we got to play him every single week. Jamison Crowder out here producing like a top 10 wide receiver in fantasy points per game. Didn't have a great week last week, but he's seeing so much darn volume. You can't sit him. I mean, he's not even a going into the season was like, yeah, in PPR leagues, you can use Crowder as a flex, a wide receiver 3. I was pretty high on him. Really liked him this week. Pushed him to all of you as a league winner. And then now he's out here producing not only as a wide receiver 2, but as a wide receiver 1 some weeks as well. So you can slot him in as a wide receiver 2 on your team any week, and you've got yourself a guy that gets more than enough volume to return that value for you. Carolina and New Orleans is shaping up to be a pretty interesting matchup. It could turn out to be a defensive battle that could be struggles back and forth all day, and it could turn out to be a shootout. One way or another, though, I think the wide receivers are going to get some decent work this week. Me personally, I'm leaning a little bit more towards a shootout. You know, Carolina's out here to prove themselves. And if they go into New Orleans and get a win, that would be huge for them this season, especially when a lot of people didn't have, that great of expectations for them. So I think they're going to come out running and gunning with a great game plan that's going to help them put up some points. So DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson are both going to be starts for me this week. New Orleans has not been great at stopping the pass this year, but they haven't been bad either. They're kind of right there in the middle, and in terms of fantasy points allowed to opposing wide receivers. And Carolina's just a little bit lower than that as well. But in this matchup, DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson will both be starts for me, and Michael Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders will both be starts for me. Tre'Quan Smith with Michael Thomas coming back, I think he loses a little bit of that weekly upside we saw. But again, if this turns into a battle of back and forth where they're scoring a little bit of points, Breeze is going to be chucking the ball a little bit. Teddy B is going to be chucking the ball a little bit. And it's going to be more than enough for the wide receiver 1s and wide receiver 2s to really do some decent fantasy damage. And then Emmanuel Sanders, he's looked a lot better in that connection with Drew Brees over the last couple of weeks. Coming out of a bye now, hopefully they got that situation set up even more. They should have a good game plan in New Orleans. Carolina should have a good game plan as well. And I'm expecting a great game to watch on TV. For Green Bay and Houston, I'm expecting the over here 100%. I'm not going back and forth on this one. I think this is going to be a high-scoring game. And Green Bay, after looking like absolute garbage against Tampa Bay, they're going to want to put it to Houston. Aaron Rodgers is going to want to bounce back. And, of course, Houston's going to have to throw the ball to try and keep up. So for Green Bay, Devontae Adams is 100% going to be a start for me. And then because Houston's defense hasn't been that great this year, we're going to start MVS. All it takes is one big play to make a fantasy day. And I could see him going deep down the field and hauling himself in a touchdown this week going up against that Houston secondary. So I got both of those guys listed as a start with Shepard listed as a sit. And then for Houston, Fuller and Cooks have looked absolutely amazing since the firing of B.O.B. So obviously they made the right call, and obviously that offense has greatly benefited from it. Over the last 2 weeks, they have 4 touchdowns combined. They each got 1 touchdown in each of the last 2 weeks. So again, they're clicking on all cylinders. The matchup for them, one of the guys could end up being a hit. One of them could end up, being a miss. But I'm going to start both of them because they've just been playing so well this week or these last couple of weeks. And the offense is clicking a little bit more that I think they're finding good ways and creative ways to get both of these guys the ball in space. For Fuller, he's definitely a guy that's seeing more than enough target volume. And Cooks is a guy that obviously has been bringing in some of those big plays. I like the high upside. I like the volume with both of them. Both of them are going to be starts for me in week 7. For Cleveland and Cincinnati, It's all going to rely on Baker Mayfield for Cleveland this week. Right now, I'm going to list Landry and OBJ both as starts. But if we get later in the week and we realize that maybe Baker Mayfield is still banged up and hasn't really gotten back to, a comfortable level where he can go out and perform on Sunday, we're going to move both of these guys to sit. So if you have Landry or OBJ and you're thinking about starting them, make sure you tune into my top 30 rankings because that's definitely going to play a role in this week. For Cincinnati, you don't think Cincinnati is going to want to come out and revenge that loss from early in the season? I think they will. And they're going to throw the ball a little bit on a Cleveland defense that is allowing the third most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. This offense from right now to what we saw at the beginning of the season when they first played is a lot different. And we're only in week 7, so it's hard to imagine that, the Cincinnati offense has transformed so much over that time. But it's not really about transforming. It's about feeling more comfortable. And Joe Burrow has formed a connection with T. Higgins that has made him a weekly start. So he's going to be a start for me this week. Tyler Boyd will also be a start for me this week because I imagine Burrow's going to want to come out, throw the ball around a little bit, put up some points on Cleveland, and avenge that loss, especially since they'll be playing at home this time. And for A.J. Green, a lot better week last week. Saw the most targets on the team. Definitely put together a much more solid week. But I think that A.J. Green is going to be a guy that this week doesn't have nearly as much upside as what Boyd or Higgins does. And I can't put all three of them as a start right now, even with it being a good matchup, because I expect to see probably Joe Mixon still get himself anywhere between 15 to 20 carries in this game. And if they get out ahead of Cleveland pretty early on because Baker Mayfield is hurt or the offense just isn't working over there, obviously still no Nick Chubb for them like they had the last time they faced off. Cincinnati could rely on the running game a little bit more often later in the game. So 2 starts for me, Higgins and Boyd, and then Green will be a sit. The Detroit and Atlanta matchup is going to bring 2 secondaries that allow more than 40 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. And we got some big name wide receivers in this matchup as well. Kenny Golladay is a start. Calvin Ridley is a start. Julio Jones, now that we know he's healthy and looking good, he is a start as well. I mean, I did list him as a start last week. I was just concerned about whether or not he'd actually get on the field come Sunday, and he did. So, even though we were weary of it, he got out there and he played, which we needed to see. We saw it. We're good moving forward. For the sits, though, Amendola will be a sit. Gage will be a sit. But Marvin Jones is going to be a start for me for the first time since week 1 this season. Jones really hasn't done much of anything this year, which kind of throws me off a little bit. I don't know why they're not including him in the game plan, and he isn't getting the ball as much as he did last year. But this is exactly the matchup that he would need to score a big-time touchdown. Detroit's going to have to throw the ball a little bit. They're going to be in Atlanta, and that Atlanta offense looks a lot better, right? The Atlanta offense we saw last week looks nothing like the inconsistent performances that we saw from the prior few weeks. So they look to be back on track, which means Detroit's probably going to give up some points, which means they're going to have to throw the ball quite a bit. There could be a lot of great wide receiver performances in this game. Seattle and Arizona, Metcalf and Lockett for Seattle. Coming out of the bye, we're definitely playing both of these guys. Metcalf is a perma start the rest of the season. The dude has been fantastic. One of Jake's must-have wide receivers this year, has definitely been balling out all season long. Tyler Lockett, a little bit more up and down, but we've become accustomed to that, right? If you've owned Tyler Lockett in the past, you know he has a tendency to go boom or bust sometimes. But coming out of the bye, putting together a great game plan for an in-division game, I could honestly see Tyler Lockett having a great game this week because they're going to put him in a position to win going up against Arizona. Hopkins is going to be a start, and so will Christian Kirk. Seattle's given up quite a bit of fantasy points per game in the passing game this season so far, so Hopkins obviously will be a start 100%. But Christian Kirk last week was one of my main guys on the waiver wire video that I told you to go grab and stream this week if you needed help. I listed him as start in the wide receiver video, and of course the dude goes off on Monday Night Football. Had a huge play, looked great once again over the last 2 weeks. He's the wide receiver 9 in half PPR league, so he will be a start for me again this week in what should be a pretty good matchup, and I'm hoping what will be a matchup that will see quite a bit of fantasy points, and maybe we see Arizona pull that upset in Arizona. Jacksonville and the Chargers, and for Jacksonville, Keelan Cole, a really underrated weapon so far this season. Yeah, he's not putting up huge performances or wide receiver 1 or even wide receiver 2 most weeks, but he still has looked good all season and done a good job if he's in your lineup, helping you win some matchups. He's only had really 1 week this year where he hasn't performed that well. So we're going to put him back in the start column this week with DJ Chark opposite him. And he's going to be a start for me as well. And I honestly think Keelan Cole performs a lot better when he has Chark on the field for him. He doesn't have to face cornerback 1 coverage. He doesn't have to be the main guy. He can be a guy that can be big play ability. And him and Chark have shown over the last few weeks that they do have a nice combination of high volume and big playability. For Laviska Shenault, though, he's going to be a sit for me. Yeah, he could end up seeing a decent amount of targets, but he hasn't really turned those into big plays as of yet. That's what I need to see from him to be a more consistent start for me on a weekly basis. Decent waiver wire pickup, but Cole and Chark are the guys to me that have a little bit more boom in them each week. For the Los Angeles Chargers, well, of course, we're going to start Keenan Allen, right? Keenan Allen, my guy, looking fabulous this year. Justin Herbert looking good, tossing the rock around. Allen's his main target. But opposite of Keenan Allen, Mike Williams is going to be a start for me this week as well. The dude went off a couple of weeks ago, looks healthy, looks fantastic. He had an extra week to get his body even into better shape at this point. You know, coming out of that injury, last week plays, now he gets a week off to kind of heal up a little bit more, and now he gets a chance to be back out there. So expect a big play from Mike Williams because that's what he does best. San Francisco and New England, and Deebo Samuel is going to be the only start for me on the San Francisco side, but maybe expect some limited points. This is going to be a tough matchup for him, but last week still fared well going up against the Rams, who, they have a tough secondary, but they were able to put it together and get the win against the Rams while at home. So Deebo Samuel could absolutely be a start for me again this week. More than likely, they're going to have to throw the ball around a little bit. Being in New England, I would expect them to run the ball more often, but they're a little bit banged up in the backfield right now. So maybe they switch to throwing the football a little bit more than what they're used to. And again, Deebo Samuel really steps in, and he's kind of a guy that you can do a lot of different things with. End arounds and some stuff out of the backfield, some screens, deep balls. He's so versatile and is able to go all over the field. For New England, Julian Edelman is the only person that I'm going to start on this offense until further notice, unless it's a running back, okay? I'm not starting any tight ends, and I'm not starting any wide receivers not named Julian Edelman. Why? Because the passing game, 90% of the time, looks awful. Yeah, there's been some glimpses this year where Cam Newton seems to have it, and who knows, maybe coming back last week after being on the COVID list and testing positive for it, maybe that had something to do with the performance, but this passing game just is not working on a consistent basis right now. Heck, it was a great matchup for N'Keal Harry last week, and he did jack. So, moving forward, Julian Edelman will be my only start for the wide receivers on this team. KC and Denver, and I was really hoping last week would be Mecole Hardman week, and it wasn't. So Kansas City continues to tease us with him. I'm not sure why they're not utilizing him more, though. That's the thing. The dude broke so many big plays last year. You think they would be trying to get him back into that groove a little bit this year, and they just haven't. And I'm not 100% sure why. Something I'm taking a look at and something I'm trying to keep an eye on. If Sammy Watkins ends up being out, though, it's going to be Demarcus Robinson and Tyreek Hill as my starts this week with Mecole Hardman as a sit. Now, if for some reason Watkins were to end up playing, which I don't think so at this point. I don't think he's going to play this week. But if he were, then we'll take another look at it. But as of right now, Robinson, if Watkins is out, and then of course Hill will be starts for me as well. On the Denver side of the ball, Judy and Patrick are both going to be starts for me. This is a Kansas City defense that got blown up by the Las Vegas Raiders a couple of weeks ago. I expect Kansas City's defense to be a little bit of bend, not break. Well, Denver could end up being that, a little bend, not break, meaning that Jerry Jeudy and Tim Patrick could have a decent amount of volume, but maybe they don't score. So I think they're going to be borderline right on that 10 fantasy points per game in half PPR formats. They're going to be right in that area. I think the limit for them in half PPR leagues this week is about 15, and that is if one of them finds the end zone. So expect a little bit of that. We'll see what they do running the football, and we'll see if they get back to running the football a little bit more this week. But Judy and Patrick will still be starts for me because obviously when you play against Kansas City, you got to throw the ball quite a bit. When you got to throw the ball, there's more potential for volume. Tampa Bay and Las Vegas, and Chris Godwin. If he's healthy and on the field, you have him in your lineup. But for the first time this season, Mike Evans is a sit. Why is that? Well, Las Vegas has only given up 4 passing touchdowns to wide receivers so far this season. That's one of the lowest numbers in the league. So, Mike Evans, who's solely had a lot of his points based on touchdowns so far. I mean, this is a guy that has put up less than 5 receptions, less than 40 yards and touchdowns in multiple games so far this season. A lot of his fantasy points are based off of touchdowns. And considering Vegas hasn't given up a ton of touchdowns to wide receivers, I'm a little hesitant to start him this week. I think his ceiling is really low. I think his floor is really low. And if you've got somebody that you could potentially play over him with a higher ceiling, I'd probably do it. But Godwin will be the only start for me this week. And I'll talk about more in the tight end video why I believe that is. But Godwin is the only start for me going up against Vegas this week. For the Vegas side, Nelson Aguilar, I'm going to double down on him. A couple of weeks ago, I listed him as a start, listed him as a guy that could go deep and really get those big time touchdowns. And what do you know? He ended up scoring. Good for him. He was able to jump in there and get that touchdown. So good for him. Maybe does it again this week. Don't expect a lot of volume, but maybe that big touchdown comes in and helps him out. But he's going to be the only start for me on the Vegas side of the football. Chicago at Los Angeles, the Rams and the Bears on Monday Night Football. A-Rob, I don't care who he's going up against. He's always going to be a start. The dude is just a stud. You put him in your lineup if you own him. But he's going to be the only start for me on the Chicago side of the football at wide receiver. And for the Rams, with Woods and Kupp, you start them every single week. Even though Chicago's done a pretty good job against wide receivers so far this year, yeah, you could say probably, a little bit of a limited ceiling for them. But Robert Woods continues to score touchdowns. Cooper Kupp is seeing a decent amount of volume. Not every single game turns into a bunch of catches for him, but he's still seeing the volume necessary for us to put him in our lineup every single week, even if the ceiling's a little bit lower. So A-Rob, Kupp, and Woods will be the 3 starts for me in this matchup in Week 7 on Monday Night Football. There you have it, Headliner Nation. All of your wide receivers start and sits for Week 7. If you appreciate that content, hit the like button below. And if you have any questions about any of the wide receivers, leave a comment as well. As always, if you're new to the Fantasy Headliners, hit that subscribe button. Become a part of Headliner Nation today and stick around and check out all the content for the rest of the season. Headliner Nation, I'm going to get out of here, but you stay safe, you stay healthy, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.